Sometimes the world throws away things that are only waiting for the right hands to rebuild them. Rain hammered the cracked windows of the old garage as Ethan Cole stood alone beneath a flickering fluorescent light, staring at the rusted sign hanging crooked over the entrance. Donovan Auto Repair. The paint had almost completely peeled away, leaving behind only ghosts of faded red letters and 30 years of dust. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling into a bucket near the office door. The place smelled like motor oil, cold steel, and forgotten dreams. Across the street, 3 black SUVs rolled to a stop, their headlights cutting through the storm like knives. Ethan wiped grease from his hands with an old shop rag just as a woman stepped out of the first vehicle. Claire Donovan looked completely out of place in the storm. Long camel coat, black leather gloves, sharp heels splashing through puddles without hesitation. Behind her came Ryan Mercer and 2 executives carrying folders and blueprints. Ryan glanced around the garage and laughed under his breath. "Jesus," he muttered. "This place smells like failure." Ethan heard it. He just didn't react. Claire stepped carefully over a crack in the concrete floor and looked around the garage in silence. Her blue eyes moved across the broken lifts, scattered tools, and half-covered Mustang sitting beneath a dusty tarp near the back wall. "Mr. Cole," she said calmly, "you received the demolition notice." Ethan nodded once. "Yeah. Then you know the city approved the redevelopment project. Construction starts Monday morning." Ryan smirked as he opened a folder. "Luxury retail complex. Coffee bars. Rooftop dining. You know, things people actually want." Ethan looked past him toward the old Mustang. Rainwater rolled slowly beneath the garage door. "My father built this place," he said quietly. Ryan shrugged. "And now it's dead." Silence settled heavily inside the garage. Somewhere outside, thunder rolled across the city. Claire removed one glove and signed the demolition papers resting on the hood of a black SUV parked near the entrance. Clean, efficient, emotionless. Ethan watched the pen move across the page like a final heartbeat. Then he did something none of them expected. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. Old, wrinkled, held together with tape. Ryan frowned. "What's that?" Ethan stepped forward and placed the envelope on the dusty hood beside the contract. $1,000, he said. "Cash." Ryan blinked before bursting into laughter. Even one of the younger executives smirked. Claire stayed silent. Ethan looked directly at her. "Sell it to me." The rain outside seemed louder now. Ryan shook his head in disbelief. "You can't be serious." Ethan didn't move. "I'm serious." Claire studied him carefully for the first time. Really studied him. Mid-30s. Exhausted eyes. Grease-stained jacket. Hands scarred from years of real work. But there was something else too. Something stubborn. Unbroken. "Mr. Cole," Ryan interrupted. "This property's worthless. The lifts barely work. The roof leaks. Half these tools belong in a museum." Ethan glanced around the garage slowly, almost affectionately. "Then why are you trying so hard to take it?" That shut Ryan up for a second. Claire stepped deeper into the garage. Her heels clicked softly against stained concrete as she stopped near the covered Mustang. $1,000 is everything you have, isn't it?" she asked. Ethan didn't answer immediately. Finally, he nodded once. "Yeah." Claire looked toward the tarp-covered car. "And what exactly do you plan to do with this place?" Ethan's eyes drifted toward the old garage sign hanging above them. Water dripped steadily beside him. "Build something worth remembering." Ryan scoffed again. "Out of this dump." Ethan looked straight at him this time. Calm. Steady. "No," he said softly. "Out of what everybody else gave up on." For the first time that night, Claire Donovan stopped seeing a broke mechanic standing in a dying garage and started seeing a man who genuinely believed he could bring dead things back to life. The contract was signed at 8:47 that night. Ethan remembered the exact time because the old clock above the office door had stopped years ago at 8:47, frozen beside a crack running through the yellowed glass. Claire Donovan handed him the keys without ceremony. No smile. No congratulations. Just a simple nod before turning toward the SUVs waiting outside in the rain. "Demolition permits are canceled," she told Ryan calmly. "For now." Ryan stared at her like she had lost her mind. "Claire, this place is a financial corpse. Then it should not concern you anymore." Her voice stayed cold enough to end the argument instantly. Ethan stood silently near the Mustang as the executives filed out of the garage one by one. Ryan stopped before leaving and glanced back over his shoulder. 6 months, he said with a smirk. That is how long before you are begging the bank to take this place off your hands. Ethan said nothing. The SUVs disappeared into the storm moments later, leaving only silence behind. The garage suddenly felt bigger, empty, like a church after everyone had gone home. Ethan looked down at the rusted keys sitting in his palm. Donovan Auto Repair officially belonged to him now. Every broken pipe, every cracked tile, every leaking inch of it. He slowly walked toward the office in the back corner. The old floorboards creaked beneath his boots. Dust covered everything inside. Filing cabinets leaned sideways. Coffee stains marked ancient paperwork scattered across the desk. On the wall hung a faded photograph of a younger man smiling proudly beside a blue race car. Ethan's father, Daniel Cole. Ethan stared at the photo for a long moment before sitting heavily in the old office chair. "We got it back," he whispered quietly. Rain tapped against the windows while memories crept in whether he wanted them or not. 15 years earlier, this garage had been alive. Music playing on the radio. Customers lined up outside. Engines roaring through open bay doors. His father laughing with grease on his hands. Back then, Ethan believed hard work could fix almost anything. Then came the contracts with Donovan Motors. Bigger jobs. Bigger pressure. His father borrowed money to expand the shop. Hired more workers. Trusted the wrong people. Ethan still remembered the day everything collapsed. Investors backed out. Parts shipments vanished. Bills piled higher every week. And somewhere inside all that chaos, Ryan Mercer quietly climbed the corporate ladder at Donovan Motors using prototype designs Ethan himself had helped create. By the time Ethan realized what happened, it was too late. Donovan Motors became richer. The garage became a graveyard. Ethan rubbed his eyes and stood up slowly. The office heater no longer worked. Cold air drifted through gaps in the walls. He grabbed a flashlight and walked toward the back storage area where old equipment sat beneath layers of dust. Shelves leaned under the weight of forgotten tools and rusted engine parts. Then the flashlight beam stopped suddenly. Ethan froze. Hidden beneath an old canvas tarp near the rear wall sat a steel cabinet he had not seen in years. His pulse quickened as he stepped closer. The lock was broken. Slowly, he pulled the door open. Inside were dozens of notebooks, blueprints, handwritten calculations, engine schematics covered in oil stains and his father's handwriting. Ethan carefully picked up the top notebook. The pages crackled with age. Across the front, written in faded black marker, were 4 words. Project Phoenix Hybrid. Ethan's breathing slowed. He opened the notebook carefully and stared at the drawings inside. Advanced fuel systems. Lightweight electric integration. Concepts years ahead of their time. His father had not been trying to save the garage at the end. He had been trying to build the future. Ethan sat down on the cold concrete floor surrounded by dust and silence. Outside, thunder rolled across the city again. He looked around the dying garage one more time, but suddenly it did not feel dead anymore. It felt unfinished. By sunrise, Ethan had not slept for even 10 minutes. The office lamp still glowed weakly beside stacks of blueprints spread across the dusty desk, while cold morning light crept through the cracked garage windows. Empty coffee cups surrounded him. His eyes burned from exhaustion, but for the first time in years, his mind felt awake. Really awake. He flipped another page inside Project Phoenix Hybrid and leaned back slowly in disbelief. His father had solved problems major manufacturers were still struggling with. Lightweight battery distribution. Heat, efficiency, reduced fuel drag. Some of the concepts looked impossible for a small garage built 30 years ago. Yet every calculation was there in Daniel Cole's handwriting. Every sketch, every correction, every dream. Ethan rubbed his thumb across one faded note scribbled in the margin. Real builders do not chase trends. They build what lasts. The words hit harder now than they ever had before. Outside, traffic slowly filled the streets as the city came alive. Inside the garage, nothing moved except the old ceiling fan wobbling above him. Ethan stood and walked toward the covered Mustang again. Carefully, he pulled away the tarp. Dust exploded into the air as the shape underneath finally emerged. A 1967 fastback Mustang. Midnight blue beneath years of neglect. Rust around the wheel wells. Flat tires. Cracked windshield. But the body lines were still beautiful. Proud. Almost stubborn. Ethan stared at it quietly. Dad always said you were worth saving too, he murmured. The garage phone suddenly rang, nearly making him jump. Ethan frowned and walked quickly into the office. Nobody had called this place in years. He picked up the receiver cautiously. Hello. You are open? A woman asked. Ethan blinked. Depends who is asking. My delivery van broke down 3 blocks away. Somebody told me there is an old mechanic shop nearby. Ethan looked around the garage. Half the equipment barely worked. The hydraulic lift groaned like it wanted retirement. He almost said no. Almost. But then his eyes drifted toward his father's photo hanging beside the office window. Yeah, Ethan said finally. Bring it over. 20 minutes later, a white bakery van rolled shakily into the garage, coughing smoke from the exhaust. The driver climbed out wearing a flour-stained hoodie and camera hanging around her neck. Blonde hair tied carelessly into a loose bun. Tired eyes. Maybe late 20s. Please tell me you are actually open, she said. I have 6 wedding cake deliveries before noon. Ethan crouched near the engine as she spoke. Alternator belt is shredded. Can you fix it? She asked quickly. Ethan glanced toward the nearly empty shelves. Maybe. The woman crossed her arms nervously. That sounds terrifying. Ethan smirked faintly for the first time in a long while. Terrifying costs extra. She laughed softly, and somehow the sound made the garage feel less empty. Ethan found an old replacement belt buried beneath boxes and storage and spent the next 40 minutes repairing the van while she sat nearby editing photos on her laptop. Every now and then she glanced toward him curiously. So this place is really yours? She finally asked. Ethan tightened a bolt carefully. As of last night. You bought a dead garage? Apparently. She studied him for a second. Most people would run from something like this. Ethan wiped grease from his hands. Most people only see what something is now. She tilted her head slightly. And what do you see? Ethan looked around the garage slowly. Sunlight now spilled across the stained concrete floor. Dust floated through the warm beams like tiny sparks. For a moment, he could almost hear the old shop alive again. Music, laughter, engines roaring. A second chance, he said quietly. The woman closed her laptop slowly. I am Sophie, by the way. Ethan. She smiled faintly. You know, Ethan, people online love comeback stories. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Good thing this is not one yet. But neither of them noticed the old security camera above the garage entrance still blinking red. Still recording. And somewhere inside Donovan Motors headquarters downtown, Ryan Mercer had just received an alert that Donovan Auto Repair suddenly had power running through the building again. 3 days later, the garage no longer looked abandoned. It still leaked when it rained. The front windows were still cracked. Half the neon letters on the old sign still refused to light up at night. But something had changed. The silence was gone. Music played softly from an old radio near the workbench while sparks flashed beneath the Mustang Ethan had finally lifted onto the repair platform. Empty coffee cups lined the office desk beside stacks of Project Phoenix notebooks. Tools once buried under dust now hung carefully organized across the walls again. The garage was breathing. Ethan barely noticed how exhausted he looked anymore. He slept 4 hours a night at most, usually on the old leather couch inside the office with a jacket folded beneath his head. Every morning before sunrise, he unlocked the garage doors and worked until his hands shook from fatigue. Yet somehow, he felt more alive than he had in years. Around noon, Sophie walked into the garage carrying a cardboard tray of coffees and stopped in the doorway, staring upward. Okay, she said slowly. This is officially getting weird. Ethan slid out from beneath the Mustang, grease covering both arms. What is? Sophie pointed toward the ceiling. You fixed the lights. Ethan glanced up. Half the fluorescent fixtures were finally glowing again. Yeah. Yesterday this place looked haunted. Still does a little. She smiled faintly and handed him a coffee. Not going to lie, though. It photographs really well. Ethan leaned against the workbench while Sophie pulled out her camera. Over the past few days, she had started stopping by almost every morning between bakery deliveries. At first, Ethan assumed she was just being friendly. Then he noticed she filmed everything. The broken signs, the welding sparks, the old Mustang slowly coming back to life piece by piece. Yesterday, she had uploaded a short video online titled, "The Mechanic Rebuilding a Dead Garage." Ethan had not thought much about it until his phone started vibrating nonstop around midnight. How many views now? Sophie asked casually while adjusting her lens. Ethan picked up his phone from the workbench and frowned. 70,000. Sophie nearly choked on her coffee. In less than 12 hours. Ethan looked genuinely confused. Why do people care so much about this? Sophie lowered the camera slowly. Because everybody knows what it feels like to lose something. Her words lingered in the garage for a second. Ethan looked away first. Before he could respond, headlights suddenly flashed through the front windows. A black luxury SUV rolled to a stop outside. Ethan immediately recognized it. Claire Donovan stepped out alone this time. No executives. No lawyers. Just her. Sophie raised an eyebrow quietly. That looks expensive. Ethan wiped his hands. With a rag. That is trouble. Claire entered the garage slowly, her heels echoing softly against the concrete floor. But this time, her eyes moved differently across the room. Less judgment. More curiosity. She noticed the cleaned workbenches. The repaired lights. The music playing softly from the radio. The Mustang now partially restored beneath bright overhead lamps. You have been busy, she said calmly. Ethan crossed his arms. Thought you would be too. Claire ignored the comment and walked toward the Mustang. Her fingertips brushed lightly across the polished hood where fresh blue paint finally gleamed beneath the shop lights. This was your father's? Ethan nodded once. He bought it before I was born. Claire looked toward the office wall where Daniel Cole's old photograph still hung. My father used to talk about him. Ethan frowned slightly. Your father knew mine? Everybody in the industry knew Daniel Cole. Her voice softened just enough to surprise him. He was respected. Ethan let out a quiet breath. Respect does not pay bank loans. Claire looked back at him then. Really looked at him again the same way she had on the night of the sale. Exhausted eyes. Grease-covered hands. But now there was momentum behind him. Purpose. Ryan thinks this place will fail within a month, she admitted. Ethan smirked faintly. Ryan seems emotionally invested in my bankruptcy. For the first time, Claire laughed softly. Small. Quick. But real. Sophie noticed it immediately from across the garage. Ethan did too. Then Claire's attention shifted toward the open notebook lying on the workbench beside the Mustang. Her expression changed the second she saw the words written across the page. Project Phoenix Hybrid. The color drained slightly from her face. Where did you get that? She asked quietly. Ethan's smile disappeared. Why? Claire stared at the notebook for another long second before answering. Because I thought those designs disappeared 15 years ago. The garage suddenly felt quieter after Claire asked the question. Rain tapped softly against the windows while the old radio near the workbench hummed low country music into the silence. Ethan slowly closed the notebook in front of him. I found them in storage, he said carefully. Claire did not move. Her eyes remained fixed on the worn black cover resting beneath Ethan's hand. That project was supposed to disappear, she murmured almost to herself. Sophie glanced between them, sensing tension immediately. Okay, she said slowly. Now I feel like I walked into the middle of a movie. Neither of them answered her. Ethan leaned against the workbench. You know about Project Phoenix? Claire folded her arms tightly. For the first time since entering the garage, she looked uncomfortable. Human. I know my father invested millions into it before Donovan Motors pulled out. Ethan frowned. Pulled out. Claire nodded once. The company claimed the designs were unstable. Too expensive. Too risky for production. Ethan let out a dry laugh. That sounds cleaner than what actually happened. Claire looked directly at him. What do you mean? Ethan stepped toward the office and grabbed another notebook from the desk drawer. He flipped through several pages before stopping on an old newspaper clipping taped inside. The headline was faded but still readable. Donovan Motors cancels innovation partnership after internal dispute. Below it was a smaller photograph of Daniel Cole standing outside the garage looking exhausted. Ethan held up the article. My father spent 3 years building those systems with Donovan engineers. Then suddenly the company walked away right after Ryan Mercer took over the project division. Claire's jaw tightened slightly at Ryan's name. Ethan noticed immediately. You did not know? He asked quietly. Claire stayed silent for a second too long. That alone told Ethan enough. Sophie slowly lowered her camera. Wait, she said carefully. Are you saying somebody buried this technology on purpose? Ethan looked back at the blueprints spread across the workbench. I think somebody decided innovation mattered less than profit margins. Claire exhaled slowly and walked deeper into the garage. Her fingertips brushed lightly across one of the engine sketches. My father never talked about this near the end of his life, she admitted softly. Only once. Ethan watched her carefully. What did he say? Claire's eyes remained on the notebook. He said there was one engineer stubborn enough to build things the right way even when everybody else wanted shortcuts. Ethan looked away first. Sophie pretended not to notice the shift in the room. Outside, headlights suddenly flashed through the front windows again as another customer pulled into the garage. An older man climbed out of a dusty pickup truck and froze when he saw Ethan standing there. No way, the man muttered. Ethan Cole. Ethan blinked in surprise. Mr. Ramirez? The older mechanic broke into a grin. I heard rumors somebody reopened this place. Thought there was no chance. Within minutes, the two men stood beneath the truck hood talking like no time had passed at all. Claire watched quietly from the side, while Ethan diagnosed the engine problem in less than 60 seconds. Confident, focused, calm. Customers slowly began arriving throughout the afternoon after seeing Sophie's videos online. A college kid with brake problems. A delivery driver needing new tires. A retired couple asking about engine noise. The garage stayed busy for hours. Ethan barely stopped moving. Sophie filmed pieces of everything. The old neon sign buzzing outside at sunset. Ethan teaching a teenager how to change oil correctly. Grease-covered hands tightening bolts beneath warm shop lights. By evening, another one of Sophie's videos exploded online. This time the comments flooded faster than before. This guy deserves his own show. Real craftsmanship still matters. I would drive 3 states just to get my car fixed there. Ethan sat alone at the office desk near midnight reading the comments in disbelief while exhaustion settled heavily into his shoulders. Then his phone buzzed with an unknown number. He answered cautiously. Hello. A smooth male voice responded instantly. Mr. Cole, this is Ryan Mercer. Ethan's expression darkened immediately. What do you want? Ryan chuckled softly. To save you from making a very expensive mistake. The garage was almost empty when Ethan stepped outside to take Ryan Mercer's call. Midnight rain still clung to the pavement, reflecting the flickering neon sign above the entrance in blurry red light. Across the street, the city moved quietly beneath a low gray sky, while distant traffic hummed through the cold air. Ethan leaned against the hood of the Mustang and tightened his grip on the phone. You have 30 seconds, he said flatly. Ryan laughed softly on the other end. Still angry. That is good. Angry people work hard. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. What do you want? I saw the videos. Ryan's voice remained calm, polished, irritatingly confident. You are becoming popular. Ethan looked through the garage window where Sophie still edited footage near the office desk, while old rock music played softly in the background. Good for me. Not necessarily. Ryan paused. You are attracting attention to things that should stay buried. Ethan's expression hardened instantly. Project Phoenix. Careful, Ryan replied smoothly. Some ideas are dangerous when they land in the wrong hands. Ethan let out a quiet breath through his nose. Funny. My father used to say the same thing about executives. Silence. Then Ryan chuckled again. I can make your life very easy, Ethan. I doubt that. Sell me the notebooks. Sell me the garage. I will wire $500,000 into your account tomorrow morning. Ethan almost laughed out loud. 6 days ago, he barely had enough money for gas. Now somebody was offering him $500,000 to walk away again. He stared through the rain at the glowing garage sign his father once built by hand. No, Ryan's voice cooled slightly. Think carefully before you answer too fast. I already did. You really believe you can build something from that place? Ethan looked down at the grease stains still covering his hands. I already am. Another pause stretched between them. Then Ryan's tone sharpened for the first time. You know what your father's problem was? Ethan's jaw tightened. Do not talk about him. He was talented, Ryan continued anyway. But talent means nothing without people willing to play the game. Ethan stared into the darkness silently. My father built things people still remember 15 years later, he said quietly. You build PowerPoint presentations. Ryan exhaled slowly, clearly annoyed now. You have until Friday to reconsider. The line went dead. Ethan lowered the phone slowly and stood there for a moment listening to the ring. Inside the garage, Sophie suddenly appeared at the doorway holding 2 cups of coffee. You look like somebody just offered to buy your soul, she said lightly. Ethan accepted the coffee and leaned beside her beneath the garage awning. Close. Sophie studied him carefully. You okay? Ethan watched water drip steadily from the roof onto the pavement below. I spent years thinking I lost because I was not smart enough. Sophie stayed quiet. Now I think maybe I just trusted the wrong people. Sophie looked through the garage window toward the old Project Phoenix blueprints scattered across the office desk. You really think those designs could change things? Ethan nodded slowly. My father did. And you? He stared at the Mustang sitting beneath the shop lights. Fresh paint now gleamed across half the restored body, while the unfinished sections still showed rust beneath the surface. Broken and rebuilding at the same time. I think some things deserve a second chance before the world buries them forever. Sophie smiled faintly. That sounded suspiciously inspirational for a mechanic. Ethan smirked into his coffee cup. Do not tell anyone. I have a reputation to protect. She laughed softly again, and Ethan realized something strange. The garage no longer felt lonely at night anymore. Before either of them could say another word, headlights suddenly flashed across the building. Claire Donovan's SUV rolled slowly to the curb outside the garage for the second time that day. But this time she did not get out immediately. She simply sat behind the wheel staring toward the garage through the rain-covered windshield. Sophie raised one eyebrow. Your life is getting weird fast. Ethan frowned slightly as Claire finally stepped out holding a thick leather folder against her chest. She walked toward them with a look Ethan had not seen on her before. Not cold. Not guarded. Concerned. You need to see something, she said quietly. Then she handed Ethan the folder. Across the front, stamped in faded silver letters, were 4 words that instantly made his stomach tighten. Donovan Motors Internal Investigation. The rain had finally stopped by the time Ethan carried the leather folder into the garage office. Sophie followed closely behind while Claire remained near the doorway, arms folded tightly against the cold night air. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead as Ethan opened the folder across the cluttered desk beside the Project Phoenix notebooks. Inside were dozens of old documents stamped confidential in faded red ink. Financial reports, engineering evaluations, internal emails. Ethan flipped through them slowly while his expression darkened with every page. Where did you get this? He asked quietly. Claire stepped farther into the office. It belonged to my father. Ethan looked up sharply. Claire avoided his eyes for a moment before continuing. I found it locked in a cabinet after he passed away last year. Sophie leaned closer over Ethan's shoulder while he scanned one particular document twice. Then a third time. No way, she whispered. Ethan's jaw tightened hard enough to show beneath the shop lights. One email near the center of the file carried Ryan Mercer's name beneath a recommendation summary dated 15 years earlier. Project Phoenix termination advised. High risk to current corporate expansion model. Another sentence below it made Ethan's stomach twist. Recommend patent containment before public release. Ethan slowly lowered the paper. Containment, he repeated quietly. Claire nodded once. My father approved the shutdown after Ryan convinced the board the technology would cost too much to develop. Ethan let out a bitter laugh. So they buried it instead. Claire's voice softened. I do not think my father realized what Ryan was really doing. Ethan looked around the garage silently. At the old photographs. The cracked office walls. The years his father spent trying to hold this place together while people inside polished boardrooms quietly erased everything he built. Sophie crossed her arms. Okay. So let me get this straight. They killed the project because it threatened profits. Ethan flipped another page inside the folder. Not just profits. He pointed toward another highlighted report. Look. Claire leaned closer beside him. The report detailed fuel efficiency projections years ahead of industry standards. Smaller manufacturing costs over time. Longer battery life. Ethan looked up slowly. If this technology launched back then, Donovan Motors would have had to completely redesign its entire production strategy. Sophie blinked. Meaning? Claire answered quietly before Ethan could. Meaning somebody would lose billions. Silence settled heavily across the office. Outside, wind rattled the loose garage sign again. Ethan stared at Ryan Mercer's signature stamped across the final page. Then suddenly another realization hit him. Ryan did not just bury the project, he said slowly. He waited until everybody forgot it existed. Claire looked at him carefully. And now? Ethan glanced toward the open notebooks spread across the desk. Now he is scared somebody finally found it again. Before anyone could answer, headlights flashed through the garage windows once more. A sleek silver sports car rolled slowly into the parking lot outside. Sophie frowned. It is midnight. Who brings a Ferrari to a repair garage after midnight? Ethan stepped toward the front windows cautiously as a man in an expensive suit climbed out, holding a phone against his ear. You have got to be kidding me, Ethan muttered. Claire immediately recognized him too. Board member, she whispered. Donovan Executive Committee. The man entered the garage with a polished smile that looked painfully artificial beneath the fluorescent lights. Mr. Cole, he said warmly. I hope we are not interrupting. Ethan crossed his arms. Depends. The executive glanced around the garage before settling his eyes on the Project Phoenix blueprints visible across the office desk. Mr. Mercer asked me to deliver a formal offer personally. He pulled an envelope from inside his jacket and placed it carefully on the workbench. Ethan did not touch it. How much? The executive smiled slightly. $5 million. Even Sophie froze. The garage suddenly felt too quiet again. $5 million, that executive repeated smoothly. For the garage, the notebooks, the designs, everything. Ethan stared at the envelope for a long moment while the old fluorescent lights hummed overhead. $5 million. Enough to erase every debt, every struggle, every sleepless night. Claire watched him carefully without speaking. Then Ethan slowly looked up at the executive. Tell Ryan something for me. The man smiled confidently. Of course. Ethan's voice stayed calm. Steady. If he wants Project Phoenix that badly, he placed one grease-covered hand protectively over his father's notebook. Then maybe my father was right all along. The Donovan executive left the garage 10 minutes later carrying the untouched envelope back to his silver sports car. Rainwater reflected across the parking lot as the engine disappeared into the dark city streets, leaving silence behind once again. Sophie leaned against the office doorway and stared at Ethan like she was trying to decide whether he was brilliant or completely insane. You turned down $5 million, she said slowly. Ethan closed the Project Phoenix notebook and slid it carefully back inside the steel cabinet beneath the desk. Yeah, most people would have fainted. Ethan shrugged lightly. Most people are smarter than me. Claire watched him quietly from across the room. No, she said softly. Most people are afraid. Ethan glanced toward her. For a second, neither of them spoke. The old garage lights buzzed overhead while wind rattled the windows gently. Then Sophie broke the silence. Okay, somebody please explain what the actual plan is now. Ethan let out a tired breath and rubbed grease from his hands with an old towel. The plan. He looked toward the Mustang sitting beneath the shop lights. Half restored, half broken. We finish what my father started. Claire stepped farther into the garage office. Ethan, Project Phoenix is not just some unfinished engine design anymore. I know. Ryan is going to come after this hard. Ethan leaned against the workbench calmly. He already is. Claire looked frustrated now. You do not understand how corporate boards work. Once investors hear rumors about a forgotten hybrid system with those efficiency numbers, every major company in the industry will try to own it. Ethan's voice stayed steady. Then maybe they should have believed in it 15 years ago. Sophie slowly smiled under her breath. That line is definitely making the documentary. Ethan groaned quietly. Please stop calling it a documentary. Too late. The internet already named you. Ethan frowned. What? Sophie turned her laptop screen toward him. Overnight, her newest video had exploded past 2 million views. Thousands of comments flooded the page every minute. The Garage Reborn. People reposted clips of Ethan welding through the night beside captions calling him the comeback mechanic and the guy rebuilding American craftsmanship one car at a time. Ethan stared at the screen in disbelief. This is insane. Sophie grinned. No, this is branding. Claire folded her arms while watching the comments fly upward. Investors are already noticing. Ethan looked up sharply. Investors? Claire nodded once. People at Donovan Motors are talking about you nonstop now. Ethan let out a dry laugh. Pretty sure Ryan calls that a nightmare. Claire's expression softened slightly. Maybe he should. For the first time, Ethan noticed how tired she looked beneath the sharp corporate composure. Long days. Sleepless nights. Pressure sitting behind her eyes the same way it sat behind his now. Why are you helping me? He asked quietly. Claire hesitated. The question seemed to catch her off guard. She looked around the garage slowly before answering. Because my father built Donovan Motors from a repair shop smaller than this one. Ethan frowned slightly. Claire continued softly. Somewhere along the way, the company forgot what it meant to build things that mattered. Silence settled again. Sophie pretended to focus on editing footage while secretly listening to every word. Ethan walked toward the old coffee machine near the office wall and poured 2 cups without asking. He handed one to Claire carefully. "It tastes terrible," he warned. Claire took a sip anyway and immediately grimaced. "That is horrifying." Ethan laughed quietly. Real laughter this time. Sophie snapped a photo the second it happened. Ethan pointed at her camera instantly. "Do not post that." Too late. Claire shook her head softly, almost smiling into the coffee cup. Then suddenly the garage lights flickered once. Twice. Ethan looked upward immediately. The entire building hummed strangely for half a second before every light inside the garage died at once. Darkness swallowed the room instantly. Sophie froze. "Please tell me that is normal." Ethan's expression tightened as he stepped toward the office window. Across the street, every other building still had power. Only the garage was dark. Claire slowly lowered her coffee cup. "That was not an accident," she said quietly. Outside, a black SUV sat parked beneath the broken streetlight at the far end of the block. Engine running. Watching. The garage stayed dark for almost 10 full seconds. Long enough for the silence to feel deliberate. Long enough for Ethan to understand exactly what Ryan Mercer was trying to say. Sophie slowly lowered her camera while staring through the office window at the black SUV parked across the street. "That is unbelievably creepy," she whispered. Claire stepped beside Ethan near the window, her expression cold again now. Corporate. Focused. "He is escalating." Ethan kept his eyes on the SUV. "Good." Claire looked at him sharply. "Good." Ethan nodded once. "Means he is nervous." Outside, the SUV finally pulled away from the curb and disappeared into the sleeping city. A second later, the garage lights flickered back to life all at once. The old fluorescent fixtures buzzed loudly overhead, while the neon sign outside glowed weakly red against the night sky. Sophie exhaled slowly. "Okay. Officially feels like a thriller now." Ethan walked calmly toward the breaker panel near the office wall and checked the switches. Nothing had tripped. No damaged wiring. Just a clean power interruption. Intentional. Claire folded her arms tightly. "Ryan is trying to scare you into selling before the technology becomes public." Ethan shut the panel and turned back toward the garage floor. "Then we stop hiding it." Sophie blinked. "Wait. What?" Ethan looked toward the covered workbench where the rebuilt prototype components rested beneath shop lights. "We finished the engine." Claire stared at him like she was measuring whether he had finally lost his mind. "Ethan, Project Phoenix is still incomplete." "Not for long. You cannot seriously think you can unveil experimental technology out of a garage." Ethan's eyes drifted toward his father's photograph hanging beside the office window. "My father almost did." Silence filled the room again. Then slowly, Claire smiled. Small, barely noticeable, but real. "You really are impossible," she murmured. Ethan smirked faintly. "I hear that a lot lately." The next several weeks passed like a storm moving at full speed. Sophie's videos exploded across every platform online. Millions of views turned into interviews. Interviews turned into headlines. The mechanic rebuilding the future. The old garage became impossible to ignore. Customers lined up around the block every morning. Car enthusiasts traveled across state lines just to see the Mustang restoration in person. Investors started calling daily. Ethan ignored almost all of them. Every spare second went into Project Phoenix. The garage lights stayed on until 3 in the morning most nights, while welding sparks flashed against the windows and old rock music echoed through the building. Claire started showing up almost every evening after work. Sometimes with food. Sometimes with financial reports. Sometimes just to sit quietly on the office couch, while Ethan worked beneath the Mustang or studied his father's notebooks. One night, near midnight, Ethan noticed her asleep at the desk with paperwork scattered around her arms and a cold coffee beside her laptop. He stood there for a moment watching her peacefully resting beneath the dim office lamp. No boardrooms. No executives. No walls around her. Just Claire. Human. Tired. Real. Sophie nearly photographed the moment before Ethan stopped her with one sharp look. "Do not even think about it," he whispered. She grinned. "You are smiling again. That is new." 3 months later, the impossible finally happened. The Auto Future Expo in Chicago announced a surprise final presenter added to the schedule only 24 hours. Before opening night, rumors spread instantly across the industry floor. Investors packed the convention hall. Journalists filled every seat. Ryan Mercer stood backstage in a tailored black suit watching the crowd with quiet confidence beside several Donovan Motors executives. "He will never finish it," one board member muttered nervously. Ryan adjusted his cufflinks calmly. "Exactly." Then the convention lights dimmed. The giant presentation screens flickered alive overhead. Across the darkened stage appeared a single photograph. An old garage with a broken neon sign glowing through the ring. The audience fell silent instantly. Ethan Cole slowly walked onto the stage beneath thousands of lights wearing the same worn leather jacket he had rebuilt engines in for months. Grease stains still marked the sleeves. The room stared at him quietly. Ethan looked across the crowd once before speaking into the microphone. 15 years ago, he said calmly, the world called this technology too dangerous to believe in. Behind him, the curtain slowly lifted. And for the first time, the completed Phoenix prototype engine roared to life beneath the stage lights.